Hello there and welcome to Forgotten Cello Music. This is episode 81, Dutch and French cellists. Okay, that might be a little bit stretching it. One Dutch cellist with French citizenship and another French composer. This is based on Vasilevsky's great book about cello history, and this is the era of the 19th century. Now, I know I've already done a podcast about the French cellists in the 1800s, but when I started looking at these other composers, I couldn't resist. I had to do something about them. I felt that, in particular, Daniel van Goens, that's how I do it with my American pronunciation, or Hounds, I guess, is the Dutch way of saying it. Correct me if I'm wrong, will you? Or teach me. For one main reason, which I'll share with you later. Now, a little history fill-in here. Vasilevsky does fill in a bit about the Belgian and Dutch history after writing quite a lot about the French history. He begins way back in the 1700s with Willem de Fesch, then goes through to the early 1800s with Adrien Servet, then to the mid-1800s with Jules de Suert. He goes on to name many more cello names, very few of which I know very well. And unfortunately, he doesn't even make mention of Daniel van Hounds or Leon Boelmen. These are two composers. One is a cellist composer, that's Daniel van Hounds, and Leon Boelmen, he was a composer. Apparently, van Hounds, as you can hear from his name, has some Dutch background in his family history. Let us fill in some history, but before I do that, I would like to take the time to thank my listeners. Thank you for coming along on this journey with me. It's been 2 years that I've dragged. Which one is it, people? I've been living abroad for so long, I can't really think clearly. I've taken so much time to go over this. A lot of it is my own laziness. A lot of it is just indecision. And some of it has to do with there's just a lot of material to choose from. And it's kind of hard because there's a lot that I'd like to do. And there's only one of me. And, well, I get kind of lazy when I start thinking about all the work to do. Or maybe it's overwhelmed. Well, we're getting to the very end of the book here. I've skipped over tons and tons of pages in the interest of making somewhat coherent. Maybe? Let me know if you don't think they're coherent or if they need some work at least to smooth them over. Episodes. The end of the book is going on to 2 more sections, very big swaths of country and history. England, Scandinavia, that's one section, and the last section of the book is Slav states and Hungary. Well, just as I did with France, I'm not going to present in these last episodes anybody from the 1700s. They're all going to be focused in the 1800s. I did a lot of music back in that era, and I will save that music for some other kind of project. Now, going on to filling in some history of Belgium and Holland. As I stated already, Vasilevsky begins his section on Belgium and Holland with Willem de Fesch in the 1700s. The cellist might be aware that he wrote 6 cello sonatas, but he was also an organist, so he was quite busy with his official duties as church organist, like in Antwerp and then after moving to London. There are other unknown names to me in between de Fesch and Adrien Servet, born 1807. Servet is known in the cello world for his rather challenging set of studies with an optional cello 2 part. There are several pupils that might be known to cello players, Jules de Suert, and then another Adolf Fischer. Now, here's a name, Adolf Fischer, that I was wanting to include, but sometimes you just don't have the chops to play the music, and, well, that's me. I need a lot more practice. Now, many, 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 many more cello players were mentioned. Names completely unknown to me, it's great. It's a great read, so you can get familiar with them. But I did read some music by these names that I was unfamiliar with. François de Munch, Pierre Chevillard, both interesting. They just didn't make the cut either because they were too much work to practice, or just the other music was much more interesting to me. So I ultimately decided on Léon Boulman and Daniel van Goens. From France and Holland, as I mentioned, Vasilevsky does not mention Van Hoens nor Boulman, so all the information I'm talking about is directly related to my experience with their music, or some little excerpts of information gleaned from the internet. Daniel van Hoens. Let's suffice it to say that he was French, but with Dutch ancestry. He very obviously was particularly interested in writing for students. The vast majority of his music is student-related writing, and it's quite clear that it's pointed at them because of the distinct lack of virtuosity, which a lot of composers would have written in hands down. That's not to make it uninteresting. In fact, I find a lot of the music that was written with virtuosity in mind a little overwhelming, and it can be overboard. It's kind of like if you have too much of a good thing. Now, I think all of his music is of a high quality. He certainly knows his music theory well. He has a fine feel for melody and harmony, and does very good work in his music. Here are 3 pieces that Daniel van Hoens wrote that I chose out. The first one I mention, now as of recording this, I have not recorded anything from the Scherzo, Opus 12, number 2, which is Vivalce molto e con spirito, as far as tempo is concerned. But hopefully I do get around to at least recording some excerpts of the cello solo part. I have not entered the piano part into Muse score. But I mention this because, in my experience, this seems to be the piece that cellists would know if they know anything by Van Hoens or Goens. Please, somebody tell me how to pronounce his name. I always said it Van Goens, or Van Goens, of course, when I was a student. This is the one. It comes to me because my teacher back in my high school days said to get a collection of favorite pieces for cellists, or cellist favorite contest album. And it is the first really virtuosic piece of music that I ever played. I mean, when you hear it, when you watch someone play it, if you've played it yourself, I think you know what I mean. It may not have been the first one for other cellists, but it was certainly the first one for me, where you have to do very fast playing with a bow stroke called sautiller. It was an invigorating piece, but it was super scary because you also have to go way, way up high toward the end of the fingerboard to play those highest notes. Now, the pieces that I have recorded with piano are Romance sans parole, that's Romance Without Words, Opus 12, number 1. And by the way, the Scherzo comes from this same Opus 12, and that Scherzo is number 2. And then an Elegy, Opus 10, a standalone piece. The Romance Without Words caught my attention because of the title, really. I mean, without words, you immediately think of who else? None other than Felix Mendelssohn, right? Songs without words. And just in general, the flow of the music was very beautiful. I hope you enjoyed this one as well. Now the Elegy, Okay, this piece about remembrance made me think immediately, of course, of the more famous elegy by Gabriel Fauré for cello and piano. This one by Van Holmes is a simpler little thing. Not that it's less enjoyable, it's just less complex. Fauré oftentimes gives us some complexity that is very beautiful. I wouldn't say it's unnecessary, but sometimes it gets into the brain and you think, oh my goodness, how are you ever going to play this stuff? I mean, his sonatas can be that way in some regards. I don't think he overuses his notes. That's not what I mean. In fact, I don't even know what I'm trying to say right now. I'm just trying to sound smart. Now, his elegy, Van Hollen's elegy, does have a convincing line, and it proves to tug at my emotional strings. Let me know what you think. Now let's move on to Léon Boulman, who was a composer writing for not only cello, but many other instruments, and apparently he did a nice job of it. He was a fairly well-known and well-received composer. He also wrote a cello sonata. I hope I can do something with cello sonatas in the future with a real pianist. Well, Boulman was apparently not a cellist. There's no mention of it anyway, where I was looking on Wikipedia in particular. And I couldn't find it in the old Bakers from 1919. I couldn't find it in the old Groves from 1890-something. Just, in general, not easy to find some of these composers. It could be that they were still living when they were published. So they died into the 1900s. Both of these pieces come from Suite Opus 6, which is a suite of 4 pieces. The two I chose were the Nocturne and the Serenade. The Nocturne was chosen, I mean, again, it just makes me think of other pieces. Like Chopin's, of course, comes to mind right away. But in particular, other nocturnes that I've done here on this podcast or on my YouTube channel, like Oscar Bruckner wrote a very beautiful nocturne. Georg Goltermann, of course, I featured him many times and spent lots of time looking at Goltermann. He was one of my first interests in forgotten cello music. He wrote a set of 5, not all the same opus numbers, so I suppose it's not really a set, but it's been collected into a set. And I even have a video where I perform with a live pianist. That's my dad. All 5 of these nocturnes. So thank you, Dad, for accompanying me on those. It was so much fun to actually get to sit down and do them, rather than with myself trying to hack through them. Now I can add a third forgotten cellist composer. Okay, this is not a cellist, but he's a composer nonetheless. And then the Serenade. This proved to be a tricky little number. Very sprite. Love it. But due to the nature of playing with a recorded, computer-generated, well, I entered notes, obviously, but a MIDI soundtrack, this just was almost impossible to do it, because there's a long little serenade. Oh, sorry, not serenade. There's a long cadenza in there, and getting it to come in just right, I could do it probably if I really sat down to think of it. But anyway, if it doesn't come out as the whole piece, you know why. It's tricky to make it work. Well, that's that for this episode. I do want to just say a few other words at the end of the episode for those that have stuck around and listened to it, or just skipped ahead and happened to land here. Just listen for a second, and I'm going to ask you some questions at the end to see what you have to say. Now, this is a large swath of history and countries. You know, I've been going through this book, and I've had to pick and choose. It's in the interest of making a halfway good, coherent podcast episode. You have to do things like that. And of course, I'm doing it in the realm of forgotten cello music, so that limits it somewhat, although there are many forgotten cello composers, as we all know if you've listened to this podcast or done any of your own research. It's just a big choice, a big task, rather, of selecting pieces. And it's just as much a big task of finding something that I'm suited to learn quickly and play well. Both of those are very important, obviously. As much of a matter of finding a piano part that's not so complicated I can't manage to record it together and do a nice job. Oh, that is that one right there is a huge deal for me. Now, I do want to say that I really hope that this series that I've done of forgotten cello music based off of Joseph Wasilewski's book, The Violoncello and Its History, which unfortunately ends, and it was published in 1898, so it ends there necessarily. And nobody's written any book quite like his. I think there's one by the Strad from the 1990s. But I don't do that one here, of course, because I'm looking at music that is in the public domain for the most part. I really hope this has been informative and useful to some degree. Maybe it's useful that, I want to include that music, or I want my students to learn it, or I want to listen to that music just to listen to it, or even to the degree that I definitely don't want to have anything to do with forgotten cello music. It's not interesting to me at all. This is going to bring us to the end of this book. Not that it would be soon if I did finish out this book. Now, it's been 2 years, and I'm getting a little bit, I think it's run its course. I was very lazy, and, maybe even somewhat just kind of discouraged that it's so difficult to make this sort of thing work well. And the last 2 groups, England, Scandinavia, and the Slav states and Hungary, it comprises approximately 20 pages. Not a lot in the scheme of things, but there's composers, there's music to choose, and also in the scheme of things for this era, there are composers, yes, there's plenty of stuff that you could choose. But like I said, I'm getting to think that this project has run its course for me, and I'm just getting very disinterested in it. Or maybe it's that I'm just more interested right now in doing targeted genres or targeted composition types. Like series on nocturnes, or a series on lullabies, a series on sonatas, something like that I could explore a little more in detail about these compositions, the type of compositions, the way composers understood the descriptive titles, for example, for nocturne. I've been thinking about it for a while, and it just seems very interesting. If you've stuck with me this long in this episode, would you go and write a comment? I'm going to put a link. I'll have a question in my community tab. I'll have a post there on my YouTube channel, and you could write a comment. And I'll probably even, for those that are listening on Spotify, have a question that you could answer in your Spotify account if you're listening there. If you're listening anywhere else, then if you want to answer the question, you have to go to my YouTube account, Traveling Cello. Go to the community tab, which is linked in the description, and answer the question in my post. Or you could go to any video and leave a comment. I'll get notified that you left a comment, and you could just say something totally unrelated to the video, but you could also find a nocturne by Guiltermann, or a sonata by Mel Bonis, or Louise Ferranc, or who else? Klengel, or whatever. Well, thanks a lot. I do hope you will send your thoughts on this podcast. How do you think about this podcast? What goes through your head when you're listening to me do these podcasts? What is the reason that you even come here and listen to it, if you do indeed come back and listen to it? Is there something that you find interesting about the way I present? Also, just as interesting and important to me is, Is there some aspect of it that you find lacking that could be more compelling for your listening experience that might also draw others in to listen? Please find a way to comment and let me know what you think. I would love it, and I do my best to respond to comments. And that's it. Remember to play more forgotten cello music.